All right, y'all. All right, y'all. We about to do a review of the final exam. So I got the exam pulled up. For some of the short response stuff, I probably just type it on here. And then for the coding portions, I'm gonna just try to do them in this little workspace or scratch pad. So as I'm like coding more stuff, I probably erase the previous question just so we can only see like what's relevant. So let's start with number one. The difference between pass by reference and pass by value. So personally, I would say pass by value creates a copy of the input variable slash value and operates on that value, right? And then we know on the other hand, pass by reference uses and alters the original value or variable slash value. So this is going to look for the existing value in the computer's memory and use that. Whereas the pass by value method will create a copy of what's already existing and it'll alter the copy. So anytime we alter the copy, we know we have to like return that value and override the original manually. Whereas pass by reference is like doing that automatically for us. So looking at this code snippet, I saw some students said, well, we're creating two functions with the same name. But we're actually not creating a function here, right? This is a prototype. This prototype says we're going to create a function that's going to return a double. It's going to be called multiply, and it's going to have two parameters that are doubles. Then when we go to implement that function, we return an integer, and our two inputs are integers. So C++ basically can't reconcile that, and it can't consider these the same function. So it's going to say, all right, you gave me a prototype for multiply, and it's working with doubles, but your implementation uses integers. So what I was looking for as an answer was prototype does not match implementation. We could say double, boom, and the prototype says double, but the implementation says int. On to the next one. So number 3. This says describe the issue with the following code snippet. So we see here we're returning a specific character in our string, right? Going off of the name of this function, if I call this function get last char, I'm expecting a char, not an integer, right? So it looks like the function is already returning that char because it's using .at. However, my function says I'm returning an integer, which is not correct. So the return type should be char, not int. Return type should be char, not int. What would be the output of the following code snippet? So I don't even think I can like copy this over without dragging these lines into it. So let's just walk through it manually. So, I mean, we initialize some variables here. So A is 0, B is 10, C is 20. Maybe we can keep track of those down here. So A equals 10, A equals 0, my bad. B equals 10, C equals 20. Right? So now we say start a for loop. We see in this for loop we have an underscore, which means we're not going to put I because we're not using I anywhere in here. I is only important if we say like give me a certain string at I, right? I is important because I is keeping track of the current place in this loop. If we don't care about the current place in the loop, we can just use the underscore. We know this loop should run 3 times, so let's see what happens through each iteration. My first iteration, this says if A is less than B, let's check that A is less than B, that's true, that it should print out statement 0. And then it should increment A by 10. So let's increment A by 10. That changes A from being 0 to 10. So now A is 10. And we printed out statement 0, right? Let's make that red. All right. And so if this condition were to be false, we would have done the else if. We would have checked the else if. But since we already printed this if, we just go to a new iteration. So now if we had I would be 1 now, right? So let's see what happened this time. We're going to check if A is less than B. Is A less than B? No, A is B. So we're going to fall down to this else if. This one just happens to be checking if A is equal to B, which we know in this case it is. So we print statement 1. Boom. So now we go to the next iteration. If we had I would be 2 now, which is still valid. 2 is less than 3. So now we check, is A less than B? Nope, they're still the same. So we fall to this else if. We check, is A equal to B? Well, according to this, A is still equal to B. So we print statement 1 again. Now, if we had I, is 3. 3 is not less than 3, so we should now break out of this loop, right? So we get now to line 55. We check if A is not equal to B. Well, A is equal to B, so that's false. Then we check if A plus B is less than C. Well, A plus B is 20. 20 is not less than 20. So because this if does not execute, we fall down to the else. We don't have a condition to check for else, right? It's just if the if doesn't happen, we should go to the else. This else says just print statement 3. So we have to print statement 3. After that, my code is complete. So I should have statement 0, statement 1 twice, and then statement 3. Now I get down to this question. So 20 mod 3. I know 3 goes into 20. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. 6 times, right? 3 times 6 is 18. My remainder is 2. 18 plus 2 would have given me that 20. So my result here, let me make these all red and bold them. My remainder is 2. The data type is an integer. If I have multiplication here, I know 4 times -1, these are 2 integers. So I can already go ahead and say integer. 4 times -1 should just be -4. Next, I have exponent right here, right? So I'm doing 5 to the power of 2, which just means 5 times 5, which we know to be 25. 5 times 5 is 25. Plus 4.0, which is a double. So we have an int plus a double, which gives us a double. 25 plus 4 will be 29. Since this is a double, we should do the 29.0 to indicate this is a double in a decimal. Let's move on to number 6. So this says write a function that takes in a string and returns the most common character. So this one I think gave most students some trouble. So let's try to work through it together. Well, not together, but let's try to work through it together. So it says write a function. So I'm gonna write a comment so that I always remember what I'm trying to solve. So write a function that takes in a string. So I'm gonna say it takes in a string. I'm gonna call it S or str, whatever, and it returns the most common char. So it returns a char, the most common one. So I'm gonna say char. So looking at what this function is doing, right, it's returning the most common char. So I'm gonna say get most common char. Literally, I'm just stealing all of this information from the question. So now let's see if I can write out, like some pseudocode or just an idea of how we can step through this problem, right? So if I have my string, my input string, str, let's say str equals hello world, doesn't matter if it's capitalized in the beginning or not. I probably want to say, okay, what is my first letter? My first letter is H. Let me search through here to see how many H's I have. I should get to the end of it and say, okay, I only found one H. I only found one H. And I should probably have some, in my implementation, I had 3 variables. So max count and then max char. Max count is always going to keep track of how many times the most frequent character has appeared. So every time I see a new character, I can say, okay, did this new character appear more times than like what we know to be the maximum count? If so, then I'm gonna override it. Until then, it's just gonna remain the same. So I'm gonna start this max count at 0. Max char can't really have a value because I don't even know what char to assign. And so I'm gonna say this is a char and this is an integer. We know str is just the input string. So I'm gonna say boom, I found this H and this H occurred one time. I'm gonna say is this one greater than this 0? Yes, it is. So I should say max count is 1 and the max char is now H. H is the character that has appeared the most to date, right? So basically I just went through and saw how many times H occurs. Now I'm gonna say E is my next letter. Let me check the rest of the string and see how many times E occurs. Well, we know E only occurs one time. Is this one greater than this one? No. So E doesn't occur more times than H, so there's no point in overriding these values up here. Next, I get to the L. I'm going to say, all right, how many times does this L occur? I'm going to say 1, 2, get to my third one, then we reach the end of the string. So now I have L occurs 3 times. I'm going to say, is this 3 greater than this 1? Yes, it is. So 3 gets replaced. So the 1 gets replaced with a 3, and this H gets replaced with an L. Because L is the greatest or like the most frequent character, we're going to still go through and see like the rest of the string and say, okay, does O occur more times? So then I'm going to have O, and I'm going to say O occurs twice. This 2 is not greater than the 3, and we're going to rinse and repeat with the rest of these characters. And at the end, we're going to realize that L occurred the most. And so we're going to return max char, not max count. Max count was just helping us keep track of what max char should be. So that's the algorithm. Let's see if I can write out some code to do that job. So remember I said I would start with these two variables, right? So initially I say I won't initialize that, and I'll set this to 0. So keeps track of the most frequent character, and I could probably actually just put this in this order just for context purposes. Keeps track of how many times that char appears. So max char should have the character, max count should have how many times that character appears. so that when we see a new character, we can say, all right, does it appear more times? If so, let's change to max char. If not, let's just go to the next char. So remember what I was doing though. I was observing one letter, comparing this against everything else in the string to see, are these equal? If they are equal, I know I'm seeing a new occurrence of it. So to do something like that, I know I need a nested loop. So normally I write out the template for myself before I start filling it in. So I know I need a nested loop. I know this inner loop, I can't skip over any characters, right? I have to start from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I have to go to the end of my string, my bad. So I need to observe the whole string. So I'm gonna say int I equals 0, I should always be less than str.size or .len. And I need to increment I by 1 each time so that I'm not skipping over any characters. Now for my second loop. So my second loop, so I should always be at some character, right? And my inner loop should basically start from the next character to compare. If I start at the same character, it's always going to count. It's going to compare H to H at this position. It's going to compare E to E at this position, L to L. And it's going to basically count it as a new time that character occurs, which is not true, right? We're still at the same position. So we don't want to say H occurs twice when it really doesn't. So we should start J at I plus 1. Whatever I is, we should start J from the next position. So that way, when we have H, we're going to say, all right, is H the same as E? Is H the same as L? Is H the same as L? Is H the same as O? And so on and so forth. So then I'm going to say J also should only go to the length of the string, and J should not skip over any characters either. So remember I said when I was starting off, I want to know how many times this H occurs, right? In order for me to get that total and say, all right, boom, H only occurs once, I should have some counter, right? So I'm going to say count. Count is going to keep track of how many times each individual character occurs. So if I'm at I, so I is going to be H. I know I'm seeing one occurrence of this character, right? So I can set this to be 1. I'm now seeing my first occurrence of this, and I'm only going to increment that count if I see it again. So inside of my loop, I'm going to say if something, increment my counter. If I see a new occurrence of this char, if I see a new occurrence of this char, increment my count. So if str at I equals str at j, then we should increment the count. So basically, if I'm here and I see the same thing, let's increment the count, because that means I'm seeing a new occurrence of it. Otherwise, this loop should just continue running to search for it, right? At the end of this loop, so let's say end of inner loop, at the end of this loop, we should have something like this. Our count should basically have a value of 1 for H, right? When I is talking about H, we should end up with a value of 1 for count. Count should never increment itself because there are no other occurrences of H. So once we get here, we should say, all right, boom. If count is greater than the max count, which in this case it is, right? Because max count started off at 0. So the count is greater than max count. So we should say H is now our most occurring character. So we're going to say max char equals str at I, because that's where the H came from. And then we're going to say max count equals count. So now we're saying this char is the one that's that we've just seen that occurs the most, and this is how many times it occurs. So this should run repeatedly. Every time we observe a new character, we should see how many times it appears. Does it appear more than the maximum? If not, don't do anything. If so, we should do these two steps. Say that this is our new maximum. This now occurs more than anything that we've seen. And this is the actual character we're talking about. So the end of outer loop, I feel like I'm spelling that wrong. I don't know. This is the end of the outer loop though. Once we get out of there, we now need to return the max char. Throughout these two for loops, we should be doing a whole bunch of comparisons and overriding values to figure out, all right, what is the char that appears the most? Once we finally go through this string n number of times, we should end up with the maximum char. Let's cross our fingers and see this works. So I'm going to see if I call this function with hello world, if I actually get my L. And if not, we can see if we can debug. So I get L. Let's say I have A, B, B, C, C, C. I'm expecting C, right? Let's see. Voila. Let's go on to the next one. I'm probably just going to remove this. Ooh. Explain two key differences between CN and getLine. So I would say for CN, only reads up to the first space unless more variables provided. So we know CN, it's only going to read up to that space and then it's going to stop, right? Unless you give it more variables to read those values into. So this is the first difference, whereas getLine will read until the enter key. And then let's see what we have here. The other difference is CN can read other types other than string, whereas getLine reads everything as a string. Boom. Two reasons why I might want to extract code into a function. Number one is that it increases readability. What I mean by readability is if I know my main function should be doing like 10 different things, right? Instead of me trying to create one huge block that does 10 different things, I might want to actually just create 10 functions, right? So that way, when I read that large chunk of code, I can say, okay, this function called this is being called. And if you name them descriptively enough, like it'll probably start to flow. Or at least it'll be a lot better than just having like one chunk of code and like nothing is named and it's just like you just kind of left to guess, and like people don't typically like that in industry. So this also increases reusability. What this means is, let's say I had my code in here that I wrote to get the most frequent character, right? Let's say I wanted to do that job 5 times, like in different places in my code base. Instead of me rewriting that large chunk of code 5 times, I can write it once as a function and make it dynamic enough to where I can input stuff to it and it'll still return me a valuable output. So I define this logic one time and it becomes reusable in the sense that I can just call this function whenever, right? I can throw it in a loop. Maybe I want to call it 100 times. Whereas if I don't have a function, right, I just have to always copy and paste that large chunk. which statement do we need in order to tell C++ we intend to work with input and output files? Most of y'all got this right. The answer is C. Fstream is what we use. That's the header file we use for input and output files. So here we want to check if A is evenly divisible by B. So I'm going to say if A is evenly divisible by B. So I know if there's no remainder after dividing, A has to be evenly divisible by B. Then it says or A is even. To check if A is even, I want to mod by 2 and check if that equals 0. So if there's no remainder after dividing by 2, it should be even. If there's no remainder when dividing by B, I know it's evenly divisible by B. And then it says, if the condition is true, I should print statement true. So I'm going to do cout statement true. Boom. Consider the following code segment. So we have some user input, and then we have a switch. So we get a character, or we get an int from the user. We throw that integer into a switch, and we say if that integer was in the range of 90 to 100, print this. 80 to 89, print this. 70 to 79, print this. Otherwise, print this message. So if we have a 70, I know this case is not going to get hit. This case is not going to get hit. However, 70 does fall into this 70 to 79 range. Excuse me. So I should expect to print a C, right? I should expect to print C. But is that it? Well, what does my code say? My code says print out C, but don't break. So if I don't break, then I should fall through to this subsequent case. So even though 70 only really applies to this case, if I don't break, it's going to just fall through. So it's also going to print, sorry, you didn't pass. It's going to print that as well. So remember, if I don't have a break, it's just going to fall through. Likewise with this case of 100. Same exact thing. We don't have a break for this range here. So it's going to print A. It's going to print B. It's going to print C. Then it's going to print sorry, you didn't pass. Without breaks, we're just going to keep falling through to every subsequent case. So let's see what we have here. Explain the difference between break and continue. So what I would say is that break exits a loop, whereas continue skips to the next iteration of the loop. So I'm not really going to preview it, but if that was confusing, maybe check back to, I think it was I don't know. So we did it in week 10, I believe. So we used break. I think in the slides it was an example. So let me see if I have an example of continue. Skip right past it. So this was, I like this example. So basically what happened here was that the question was if I want a user to tell me how many hats they want, right? And they enter a number, I want to calculate the cost of all of these hats. Each hat is like $10, I think. And so I'm adding to my total, right? For every hat that they give me, I'm going to walk from 0 to that number, or really 1 until that number. inclusive, and I'm going to add 10. So if they tell me they want 5 hats, I'm going to say for hat number 1, that's $10. Hat number 2, that's $10. And I'm going to get 50 at the end, right? Total is going to have a value of 50. But the caveat was, what if I want every third hat to be free? So hat number 3 should be free. Let's say in this case, they want 10 hats, right? Hat number 3, hat number 6, and hat number 9 should be free. So if at any point I have, so let me actually just said I wasn't going to demo it, but I feel like it'll help. So ignore like the poor indentation and stuff. Trying to make it work. So let's say I had the number of hats. I prompt the user for that number, and then I say, oh, this is terrible. Hold on. I can't even read this without it being indented. All right, cool. So if I run this, let's see, how many hats do you want? 4. All right, boom. So basically for every hat that I said I wanted, we went through a loop to say, all right, for each hat, add 10 to my total and then print out my total. So remember, the caveat is if I want every third hat to be free, when I enter 10, this should give me, what, $30 off because I got 3 hats for free. So what I'm going to say is, if I mod 3 equals 0, so if this number that I'm at, if the hat that I'm on is evenly divisible by 3, which should only be true for 3, 6, and 9, I'm going to continue. Continue means don't do anything else for this iteration of the loop, just skip it. So even though this instruction is here, I should never reach it for iteration 3, 6, and 9. It should just see continue, ignore everything after. It doesn't matter if I had like a million instructions down here. It should just ignore all of them and go to the next iteration of the loop. So it should ignore adding into the total. So now if I run this, it should print out, what, 70, I suppose. Cool. So when I got to hat 3, 6, and 9, I did not do this instruction, so we ended up getting $70. So we got the discount for the 3. So continue essentially allowed us to go to the next iteration of that loop. Again, I'm going to erase this. So let's go to the next question. So what would be the output of this program? So we had some functions being called, and these functions are, well, one is passed by value, right? There's no ampersand here, so this is passed by value. So whenever I see this function being called, it needs to be deliberately overriding some existing value, or well, it needs to be overriding some existing variable whenever it's being called, right? So we don't care that this is changing x to be 20 and that it's returning x. Like, that's fine and all, but if we don't use that function correctly, it's not going to do anything. Whereas with pass by reference, we have to be super careful, right? Because we're passing the actual original variable. So if I change it to 30, it's going to literally change it to 30. Everywhere that variable is being used, it's going to change it to 30. So we have to be a lot more careful, right? Like, there's no real room for error. After we change it, it's changed. We can't retrieve the original value of it back. It's changed. So here I'm saying, all right, x should be 10. Cool. So I print out before function 1, x is 10. All right. So then I call function 1. Remember, if I don't use this properly, no matter how it looks when it's defined, if I don't use it the right way, it's not going to do anything. So the right way to use it would be x equals the result of function 1. However, we didn't do that. All we did was call it, which does absolutely nothing. So X was never mutated because we know a copy was made, right? A copy was made with the alias of X. So X has a copy called X. If I were to name this Y and say Y equals 20 and return Y, we passed it X. X made a copy of itself called Y. In this case, we just naming it the same thing, but don't think that they're referring to the same variable because they're not. It's not passed by reference, right? So here we did nothing to the original X. So this should still print X after function 1 is 10. 10 remain unchanged. Then we call function 2. Function 2, like I said, is passed by reference. So in this case, we're actually changing that value to 30. So after function 2 is called, X should have a value of 30. So we should get 10, 10, and 30 for our values for X. Moving on to this question. Okay, so we were given some file, fib.txt, and what this says is, given that file, we need to read from it and determine what the prime numbers are in the sequence. We only want to print out the prime numbers. So let's set this up in a Scratchpad. So since I need a file, I'm going to say fib.txt. I'm going to copy those numbers over, excuse me. And I'm going to copy over this like provided code. I think this has everything in it. So we're just going to pretty much do it from scratch actually. So what was given says add your include statements here. So I know I need to read from a file and I know I need to print something. So I need to include IOStream. This is to print, right? Then I need to include fstream. That's to read from the file. So I'm already given this function, right, is prime. It looks like I can give it a number and it's going to return a bool, true or false, if that number is prime. So the first thing I want to do if I'm reading from a file is ifstream. This is an input file, right? We're reading from a file. I'm going to say input. I'm going to just call it input. The location of this file is fib.txt. Once let me annotate my stuff, input file object. Once I do that, now I want to check if input is open. Is this thing going to actually open, right? So I'm going to say if it opens, file is open. Boom. So let's see if this runs. So it successfully opened the file. We know we're good to proceed. So if the file is open, then we know our file is a bunch of numbers, one number per line, right? We don't want to use get line necessarily. So we know these are integers. Let's just start there. Each integer, we're going to read them one line, one at a time. We're just going to call each one n. So if I get to a number starting with 1, I'm going to say 1 is n. Then I'm going to say this 1 is n. Then this 2 is n. Then this 3 is n. I'm going to take it one by one. I'm going to say while we can read a value from input into n, while we can give n a value from our file, if n is prime, let's print out n. This is our solution. And then we need to, of course, close the file. So basically, let's go through this file. Let's keep reading values into n. But for each time we read in a new value, we're going to check if it's prime. If it's prime, then we're going to print it out. So let's see if this works. Boom. So these are the prime numbers of the Fibonacci sequence up until this number. It goes on way longer than this. It's really just adding two numbers together to get the next number in the sequence. So 1 plus 1 equals 2. 1 plus 2 equals 3. 3 plus 2 equals 5. 5 plus 3 equals 8, and so on and so forth. So these are the prime numbers. Again, I'm gonna just remove this. I'll probably keep this IO string. And boom. Let's move on. So we got 15. Fill in the signature for the given function based on the function body. Let's get into this one, right? So a couple of things. So really what you want to start with in terms of like a thought process for this question is what's given to me, right? What probably needs to be provided as a parameter. There's only two options, right? These variables we're using were either created inside this function or they were given as parameters. I mean, I guess you could assume that they like are global variables, but in this case, we have no global variables. So if anybody was confused on that, no, we didn't. We didn't want any global variables for this. So our two options are: it was created inside the function, like int I equals 0. That's created inside the function, or something like char count equals 0. Like these are clearly created in the function. The ones that we don't see being created are S, C, and max chars, right? We don't see where these are created at. So in order for us to be using them, they either have to be global variables or we have to have them sent to us as parameters. So let's start with our parameter list because I think we already started going down that road. So S seems to be, based on the way it's used, and some context may come from other questions, right? Where we've seen, for example, string S. Some of these questions could help you answer others. So I'm assuming S is a string, right? And the way it's used is using the length function. We always use that for strings. So I'm going to say string S has to be one of our parameters. Also, I see C being used. So it's like, okay, what data type would C be? Well, when we take a string and we do .at on a string, we know that gives us a char. So if this is a char and we're checking it against C, then C by default has to be a char. Then I said max chars was also not created in this function, so it has to be a parameter. It has to be an argument to this function. Well, what is max chars? Well, how is it used? We're comparing it to char count, right? Char count is an integer. So we want to know if this integer is greater than this thing here. My strong my strong guess is that this is also an integer. So I'm gonna say int max chars. We already have our curly brace here, so we don't need that. We just need to name it. The question says you may name it whatever you wish, so I'm gonna name it function, and I'll make this red in a second. But let's see, what is it returning? It says it's returning char count is greater than max chars. I know if I'm comparing two values, that comparison is always going to give me true or false. So this seems like it's going to say char count is greater than max chars, question mark. Is it greater? If so, it's going to return true. If not, it's going to return false. So this is a bool. It's telling me true or false of that expression. So we want bool, some name for our function, and our three parameters. Next we have question 16. So looking at this chart, I have true and false. Once I see this false and this and, I already know this has to be false. We can't have a true and a false and get a true. On this side, I have 2 to the power of 3. So that's 2 times 2 times 2. So 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 is not the same as 6. So this is false. We could literally just kind of like rewrite that as false if we want. And we say, or all of this stuff. Really, I just try to pick out something that could like help me get to my answer faster. So I see this big or. This whole thing, I can like try to process that, or I can just say, what does this equal? So I say not false. Not false is just true, right? So I have something or true. I know anything or true is just going to give me true. So now I have false or true. As long as I have one true, I'm Gucci. So this is Truski. Boom. Going down to this one, I have false and true. False and true, we know gives us false because we needed both to be true in order to be true. So now that I have false and it doesn't matter what this is, it's going to have to be false, right? Because we already have one false. So now we could go with false. Boom. This is my answer. And I probably should have just, so I just reverted that back just so I'm not like losing the original state of this. Cool. So now, question 17. Finish line 98 by writing the code that can get the string last from the variable created on line 97. So if this is my variable on line 97, I need to figure out how I can just take a portion of it to get this, right? Well, the first question I need to answer is, how many chars do I want? Answer is 4, right? We want 4 chars, LAST. The real first question I have is, what is my start position? So we start 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 11 is our first position that we want, right? So now we have the two numbers that we need in order to do a what? A substring. So I'm going to take the phrase. I'm going to say, just give me a portion of it. I don't want the whole thing, I want a portion of it. So give me a substring, start from position 11 and give me 4 characters. Boom. Short and sweet. Start from position 11, give me 4 characters. I saw a lot of 11, 14 thinking that this was give me 11, 12, 13, 14. That is not how this language does substring, but that would be correct for another language. C++ wants to know the start position and the length of the substring. So let me see if I could just revert that. I really should have created a copy of the exam. All right. So now 18. This is if. So I have a function. This function wants to know if a certain character is a vowel, right? So that bool means this function could return true or false. I see a return true here, but I don't see a return false. So let's say I pass through a G, right? There is no case that handles the G. So the G would make this case false, right? The if statement would not be true. But we have no handling down here for a G or anything other than A, E, I, O, or U. So that's the first issue, right? We don't have no handling for our consonants, right? The other issue is that these are not, this symbol right here is not checking if C is equal to this, right? It's actually trying to, this is an assignment operator. It's trying to assign C a value of this. So if we do that, that's not actually comparing, right? That's not giving us that true or false that we want. We're trying to check here if C has a value of A or if it has a value of E or I or O or U. But in fact, we're not even doing that. So we actually want to have single equal signs should be double equal signs. This is a really common mistake I saw like throughout the semester, so I wanted to like re-emphasize it on the exam because you do not want to. Sometimes your code will actually run, like it'll actually run, it won't throw an error, and you'll have no idea where that error is if you just get in the habit of like improperly writing an equality operator. So let's move on to 19. Describe the issue with the following code snippet based on its stated behavior and describe how we could fix it. So let's see. What is this function claiming it's supposed to do? This function returns the index of the first occurrence of C, right? So we're given C, and we're saying once we find it, we should return the index of it. If C happens to never appear, though, we should return the length of S, which is our input string. So I'm going to just try to step through this and see what stands out to me. So I have index. Normally we see this being initialized here all in one step. The reason it wasn't is because I is actually the value we want to return, right? So we can return I if it's only being returned in here. So if I said something like return I or return index, like I could do this step here and just get rid of this. But remember, in the case that we don't find it, we also, like in the case that we don't find the character we're looking for, we need to return it at the end. Like we would need to return the length of S. So I mean, I suppose we could just say return S dot size. But that wasn't the way the function was given to us, right? The function was given like so. So that way we only need to have one return statement. It's going to look a lot more sleek and follow a lot better if we just have one return statement to return the index, because index should either be where this character occurs or index will end up having the value of the length of the string. So it decreases like the amount of redundancy. So if we find the character, this function says it should return the index, right? So let's say I'm going through this string. I'm looking for E, right? Given right here. It says look for E, tell me where it occurs. So the 0th place is not E. I think that comparison of checking what's at that current index against my target character is here, right? So I'm trying to check here if I found that character. In this case, I didn't find it, right? 0, what's at 0 is a T. T is not equal to E. So we're just going to keep going in our loop. This will only be true if I actually did find it. The fact that I didn't find it, this loop has no else. So what it's going to do is just go to the next iteration anyway, right? We only want to take action and return the index if we do find it. If we didn't find it, we just want our loop to continue on naturally and just keep trying to find it, because it's going to break out whenever we reach the end of the string. It's going to do that naturally. So once we get to the next character, right, index is now 1. We check what's at index, which is an E. We check it against our input character, which is an E. In this case, the existing code says continue, which means go to the next iteration of the loop. We have no reason to go to the next iteration of the loop, because let's say this were an E. This would make us end up returning 2, but this says give me the first index, right? So I want to stop here. The only way I can make this stop by changing one line is to break, right? The only way I can do that is to break. If I break, index should still have a value of 1, and I would return index. So instead of continuing and going to the next iteration of the loop, I should break out of this loop. Don't keep looking for characters. Stop right here. Just return whatever index has, which is 1. So the issue, to reiterate, was that in the event that we find the character, we were continuing with the loop. In actuality, we want to stop it by breaking out and then to finish off the function. Remember, break doesn't stop the function, it just stops the loop. So it exits the loop, right? Then it says return the index. Return whatever index you left off at, which in this case would be 1. In the second case, index starts at 0, then it goes to 1, then it goes to 2, then it goes to 3. And then once index becomes 4, right? 4 is, so it's still going to end up being incremented. So it's going to have a value of 4. And then we're going to return index because this loop is going to stop. So we're going to end up returning that value. Let's move on to the final question. So given the following table of input values and their expected return values, fill in the return statement. So let's see what we have. So we're given all of this code. And so it looks like what this function here is doing is creating an empty string. And similar to this last question, right? Looks like it's searching for something. If I find my input character, add that character onto some string, right? So let's say string s equals let's say string s equals hello world. I know I use this example for like literally everything. And let's say char c is L, right? Right now I'm just focusing on what this function does. It looks like it takes in a string and a char. Every time it finds that char in the string, it's adding that char onto filtered string, right? So string filtered string equals, it starts off empty. But if I go through here and I find, so H, is H the same as L? No. Is E the same as L? No. Is L the same as L? Yes. And it says, in that case, add it to filtered string. So now filtered string has a value of L. Go to my next iteration of my loop. Is L the same thing as L for this next one? Yes. Add it to my string. Keep going through, not adding anything. I find this last L. So now filter string has 3 L's in it, right? Cool. So now it's saying return the filtered string. So I'm going to return this thing. So this is returning a string. And in this case, my test char was L, just to see how this function worked, right? The hint says, think about what character C needs to be to get these exact outputs, right? So if my string is hello world, I need to figure out what C should be. And so I know I'm pretty much going to be calling that function, right? Filter characters. But I know that this is going to return me a string. So I need to do something to this string that I'm getting to be able to get these numbers, right? So if I give my string as a day away, I'm trying to see, okay, since all this was actually doing was like searching for a character and seeing how many times that character is occurring, that's what it looks like. I want to try to see, okay, what character does C need to be in order for me to get 3 from this, right? What character occurs 3 times here? Well, it's not a space. There's only 2 spaces. There's only one capital A. There's only one D. As far as lowercase a's, there are 3. So that's a viable candidate. There's only 2 Y's. So that's the only character that could be relevant here is the lowercase a. But let's see if that checks out for all the other cases. Capital H, there's only 1. A, there's only 1. Exclamation mark, there's only 1. So for this case, it could be any of these, right? Now for this case, if I have capital H, only 1. E, only one. L3, sorry. O, there's 2. Spaces, there's 1. W, there's 1. My bad. O, there's 2. R, there's 1. L, there's 3. D, there's 1. Exclamation mark, there's 1. So if we think A is a strong candidate, let's see how A checks out in this case. A, there's no A in this string. So that will give us a 0, right? A in this case appears once, so that gives us our 1. A in this case appears 3 times, so that gives us our 3. So A looks like the only character that checks out all 3 cases. So we know that C could be A. Our char can be A. No matter what our strength for S is, C should be A. It's counted how many times A occurs in a string. So I know when I call filter characters, we can't just leave it blank, right? We have to give it 2 parameters, a string and a char. Well, since we're getting a string from the exam question, that, you know what I'm saying, that's the string that we are inputting into the function. So that's the string that we want to check and see how many of this character appear in this string. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to literally get this parameter or this argument from exam question. I'm going to pass it right to another function. Then I still need a char to put in there. We said the char that checks out for all 3 of those cases is A. So I'm going to wrap it in some single quotes and throw it in there. Remember, this is going to return the actual string though, right? We want the length of that string to tell us how many A's were actually present, in that string. So we want the length or the size of that string. So let's see if this actually works or if I'm just making stuff up. So I'm going to indent. So, and I use that size. So boom. We are calling exam question and we're giving it a phrase, right? Or we're giving it a string. So let's say I call exam question and I give it hello world exclamation mark. Hello world exclamation mark. And this function is going to return us the number of A's in this string. So I'm expecting a 0 to print, right? Let's see. Ooh, sorry. What's the issue? Filter characters. It's complaining about string. Oh. Alright, so this should print 0. Let's see. Boom. Let's try our other cases. So if I have ha as my string, let's see if I get a 1. If I have a day away, remember capital A and lowercase a are different. So this should give me the 3. Voila. So all 3 of these cases check out if I return filter characters, I pass it the same string, and I hard code the A. We're searching specifically for A. And that is pretty much it. That's pretty much it.